Um, my title today is on social networking sites, usage of SNS among Malaysian university students and lecturers, a nationwide study. This is a study that I conducted about 10 months ago. Because I've got a very romantic voice, so what I've done yesterday, I had this sore throat since Saturday morning. So that's about 4 or 5 days already. So give me a few minutes so that I can get back my voice. So I will begin my presentation with 2 short videos for you to enjoy. And basically, the aim is to give you an overview of what I will be presenting with my romantic voice in a moment. I like to explore new tools. I train lecturers in Malaysia how to develop interactive content. So these are some of the areas that I'll be talking. Just to give you a very quick overview. We will look in detail in a moment. I still have a bit more voice to spare. Otherwise, I intend to just do a silent movie using the video. So the first part of my presentation will focus on the students. And the second part of my presentation is on the students. I forgot to loop the music, so that's why a bit boring now. Okay, now if you notice, the last element that I showed just now was SNS feature in LMS. So that is actually the context of my study. Being the chairperson of what we call MIPTA, the Council of E-Learning among Malaysian higher institutions, I have noticed that in the context of higher learning, e-learning has been equated to like an online, I call it the fridge example. When you go shopping, grocery, weekly, you buy vegetables and so forth. So you put the items in the fridge, and then your son will pick an item, your daughter. I have seen that the e-learning environment in the higher education has become like an online storage, where it's mainly dumping digital content, files. So students come. There is very little actually engagement, online activities. So actually that was the context. I wanted to find out the SNS usage among lecturers and students, and see how we can actually embrace the social media into our learning environment to make it more, I think, meaningful. I don't know whether you have spoken to students, but in fact, this morning I was in a meeting. It's like they are here in the Facebook, so it's like they don't even gaze into your LMS. They just go and take the notes, and then they are very much engaged in the SNS. So I think it's very important that we understand what is happening as far as social media is concerned. Are you able to follow me, or okay? This is the best I can do with my voice. Okay, so although in my PowerPoint you see lots of figures, don't worry. We will look only at the relevant ones, and then let's talk a bit about the implication for us as educators. And if I have time, I will share with you what we have learned from this survey, nationwide survey, that we have done in UKM at our university to embrace the social media, the personal learning environment into the e-learning context. So, as I was mentioning earlier, we'll see from two perspectives, from the student's perspective, from the lecturers, and then the implication of social media as an informal and formal learning. And if I have time, I will show some live case study from UKM. Okay, I was lucky to be able to gather data from 6,562 students and from 941. I use online survey, convenient sampling because it's online. And let me share with you a trick. People always ask, Prof, how are you able to get so many respondents? You need to show a big carrot. So here, we say there's a lucky draw of one iPad. So you get all the students, Otherwise, today, you'll get so many online, surveys, and you say, oh, another survey. But if the carrot is right, you'll get good response. So I was able to gather this data in a matter of a month, okay, just by putting the carrot. Okay, this is the gender distribution, not so important. Mainly, so that what we can understand today, as far as the use of SNS in Malaysia, among Malaysian university students, we're talking from the undergraduate perspective, but we've got some data, about 11% from the postgraduate. This is mainly from public university. The fact that it's fairly difficult for me to get access from the private institutions. Okay, just to give an. Now, as far as the field of study is concerned, mainly SNT, Science and Technology. I want also to understand from the medical. In fact, we have done some papers. We tabulated usage by medical students, but I will not share it with you today. Okay, as far as the CGPA, we also wanted to see whether there's any correlation between CGPA and SNS. I think I've written a paper. Okay, this is place of residence of these students. So majority of them stayed in campus. No problem, they've got a computer, they've got a notebook. Now, I do not know what's the state in OUM, but in many public universities, we find that students complain they've got problem accessing the internet from the college, from the what we call the accommodation. My students, I always notice they work from anywhere between 10, 11 o'clock at night till maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I normally, if I have time, I will show you. My course is run like a task base. They get a task weekly. And my class, face-to-face session is on Monday morning, 8 o'clock. So they're supposed to complete the task before that. And I always notice, because in our system, we're able to track when they submitted the task. Okay? And so my class begins at 8 o'clock, and I get students submitting it about 5 hours before that, 4 hours. So I say, you mean you stayed up until 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock just to submit my task? So this is something that I think Malaysia needs to address in terms of how to provide a better access, Wi-Fi access, especially to the students. In terms of computer and internet skills, I think this is just to give us an idea. Okay, now what time of the day students sit in front of the computer? So at night till about 3 o'clock in the morning. Some probably begin as early as 6 o'clock. Okay, these are some demographic data. Okay, rate the following online activities in terms of the time you spend most. 1 to 5. So the mean score for social networking learning, not much gaming is going on, not much chatting, okay, emailing. So there's some learning, but the learning is second to social networking. Do you have, now, this is 10 months ago, this data. I think if you're going to run the study again, I'm very sure that the percentage of those having SNS will be at least 90%. Okay? So 80% of our university students are on some kind of Twitter or Facebook. Okay? For those who have not got an account, I've asked them, do you plan to register? So half of them say yeah. Okay. 50% says no. So we still have this hardcore, no. This is totally social in nature. So I asked them why. If you do not intend to register with any SNS, please state your reason. I'm just not interested. Okay. I'm not aware, so there are maybe students from the rural area not aware. I have no need for SNS. I have poor internet skills. Or I don't think we should mix social and formal and informal learning. So these are some reasons for the hardcore. Okay. Now, in terms of membership, they can choose more than one. The majority of our students are on Facebook, whether we like it or not. So mine is 89.9, nearly 100%, although some has got. But I think the percentage for Twitter probably has now increased, because this is about 10 months ago, the data. So 5,000 out of 6,500 is on Facebook. Okay, and I've asked them, if you've got more than one SNS account, which one is your favorite? Still Facebook. So sometimes you just wonder if they are on Facebook, what are we doing with our LMS, or what can we do to get them? Actually, one of the reasons that we developed this study, we wanted to create an online environment system in a way like using Facebook as the gateway, or from Facebook you can see the online environment. This is what we're currently doing in UKM. How long have you been a member? So this is not a new phenomenon. They've been using Facebook, MySpace, for more than maybe a year, up to 3 years. Okay, how much time do you spend? Between one, so they spend quite a lot of time actually, 1 to 2 hours daily on. I've got 7 children, 4 girls, 3 boys. I know how much time they spend on social media. So at home, I do research on mobile learning. So I've got about 7 tablets at home. So you'll see each one in the corner with their, and sometimes when I'm in bed with my wife, I'll be using my favorite is now Samsung Note 2 10 point. I like that because I like that S Pen. And my wife will be also listening to some sermons or ceramah. Okay, and I'm sure many of us have got kids. How much time they spend on these social networking sites. Okay, let's try to understand a bit more. What's the purpose? With whom do you communicate most? 77% with friends. A bit. Now see the lecturers. Now in the moment you'll be surprised. When you ask the lecturers, do you communicate with the students? They say yes. But according to the students, they never communicate with the lecturers. They don't want the lecturers to know. Actually, I'm not so much into social networking sites. I use other tools. I think 5-6 years back, when we do not know what our children do, so we have now changed our strategy. My wife said, no, if you can't beat them, you join them. So ever since mommy is on Facebook, they're more disciplined now. They're more disciplined. Otherwise, we do not know what they're doing. But now, you know, they're okay because you can actually, in a way, quote unquote, monitor what they do. Okay, so this is interesting that I think students see SNS more as a social medium, not so much formal or even informal learning. Okay, which of the following activities, application do you use most? Rank 1 to 5. Checking on friends, status update. Okay, the normal thing, our teenage want to do. Okay, the purpose. Okay, keep in touch, communicating with classmates, connecting with long lost friends. Okay, there's something good here, discussing information related to courses. So, after all, it's not, 100% social activities. There are some, form of formal, informal learning taking place. Okay, very little entertainment, making money. Okay, please rate your online. Yeah, we wanted to know in terms of engagement, how much engaged are the students, with LMS. So it's like a culture to them already. I must log into my SNS at least once a day. It's part of my life. Okay, and I would be sorry if SNS. I think let's try, to shut down some of the social Facebook for 1 or 2 days and see what happens. Okay, now I pose them some questions in terms of the use of SNS for informal learning. I gave some examples there. Okay, informal learning is where you carry out learning activities such as blah blah blah. Okay, so there's some form of informal learning. I think that's what we call incidental learning. Am I right? Have you opened your Facebook and then somebody posted a wall on a quotation or something? You pick up some new skills, some new ideas, some new motivation. So we call that something that you don't plan to, but you learn by accident. Frequency of use for informal learning. So meaning to say, if we can actually study the data, probably I think we can agree that with the correct approach, I think, and I'm sure many lecturers, many teachers have tried using SNS as an environment for informal learning, informal discussion, and they're quite successful in that sense. Okay, perception on SNS for informal learning. So they thought that probably it can be very helpful, and even though they're using it for social purposes, it will not affect the academic performance. Okay, now this is for formal learning. I gave them a few items and say yes and no. Okay, what do they think if we make use of SNS, social networking sites, for formal purposes? So the response has been, if it's quite positive. Okay, you've got the handouts with you if you want to refer to it later. Okay, what are your feelings about using SNS for class? Yeah, I would welcome the opportunity to connect with other classmates. It would be convenient. Okay, very little say, I feel that my privacy will be invaded, So I think the responses have been more of the positive side. Students look forward, if you can sort of embrace social media in the classroom. Okay, now this is the thing that we wanted to know. That if we can identify features of SNS that we can embed in our LMS, what would it be? So they say, if I can download courses, access course info. So they'll be very happy if they can do many of what our LMS is doing. Okay, if you can embed this, if you can merge the two together, the SNS and the, we have actually used this data to develop a new system in UKM. We call it iFolio. Okay, if I have time, I think I have time, I will very quickly show you what we have done, because that is actually one of my main purpose of conducting this study. Okay, now let's move on to the lecturers. So we've completed the first part. So we've got a good gender distribution, teaching experience. So we've got the younger ones, also the professors, more than 15 years. They also participated because we also offer them another carrot. So we managed to get 941 lecturers to take part. Age group, okay. We've got 25, mainly 25 to 40, but we also have got the wiser generation. Let's see, the wiser generation.